Alright guys, welcome to this GameMaker Studio tutorial. We're going to be making a top-down shooter. This is going to be a pretty chill, relaxed tutorial. If you guys have any questions, you can leave a comment. I should respond pretty quickly. We will be using GameMaker language, so it's not going to be drag and drop. If you do use drag and drop, I'd recommend learning GameMaker language, and this could be a good tutorial to sort of test out using GameMaker language. So anyways, we'll get straight into it. We're just going to make a new project, just a game, blank game. I'll just call it top-down shooter. And we're straight in. In today's lesson, we're going to just go over basic movement. Nothing too difficult. First thing we're going to do is just probably make a couple sprites. Just come in here, right click, create sprite. Just going to name this sprite player. It's probably actually all we need for this tutorial will just be the player. We'll call it sprite player idle, actually, because we might make a few different animations for the player later. But for now, this is just going to be our player sprite. Edit image. Make some kind of sprite. I'm just going to draw something really quick. You can just use a circle if you want. This is going to be an artistic masterpiece. We can do green for our player, like an army guy. Something like this. There we go, that's his head. And he will have a gun. As this is a top-down shooter, we can give him some kind of gun. And that's beautiful. That's all we need. Just we got our player there. Looking absolutely beautiful. Now that we have this sprite, I'm going to create a player object. We call it OBG player. I definitely recommend this naming scheme. Sprites start with SPR. Objects start with OBJ. It's kind of like the GameMaker meta. It's pretty good. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we got our player object. We're just going to give him the sprite here. Sign him is sprite player idle. Beautiful. I'm also just going to dump him in the room. So you'll start with the one room active by default. So be your starting room. Don't have to change anything in here. We're just going to drag our player into the room. And this is essentially what you're going to see when you launch the game. It's just going to launch this room. This is going to be the size of the window, and our player is going to be right in there. But right now, if we launch the game, he's not doing anything. We got to add some code. So we're going to go into the events, and we're going to add a step event, which a step event is essentially anything in our step event gets ran every single frame. So we're going to pick GameMaker language code. Don't ask again. Thank you. And in here, there's a couple ways you can usually do movement. You could add an event that is like checking for key down inputs here. So like check that the left key's down, check that the right key's down, or like maybe WASD if you want that for movement. But we're not going to do that. It's much better practice to do it in the step event and sort of write the key checks yourself. And the biggest reason for this is that later on you might want to change the key presses, or you might want to make it so there's custom hotkeys and the player can actually change what their key bindings are. So I definitely don't recommend using these. You can if you want though, but we're gonna use the step event, and we're gonna use a little bit of a different method for the movement. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna set some variables for which keys are the keys we want to use for movement. So we can do key, I'll just call them left, right. Yeah, so variable left equals, and then we'll do WASD, I think is probably the most common for the kind of game we're making. And we'll actually we should put them in. There's a thing called ord. Yeah. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a variable. We've just named it left. I might name it left key so you understand what it is. So the left key is equal to, and we can't just set it to the A key. We have to use this ord function, which basically, as you can see here, it returns a Unicode character. None of that matters. Just know that it doesn't understand what the character A is, right? It needs the key for A, which we got to use this ord thing for, right? If you press Control D, it actually duplicates the line you're on. So we can just duplicate this 4 times. And we can write this out for each different key press. So left, right, up, and down are the 4 keys we're going to doob. Probably not doob. Down will be good. And we can do right can be D, up can be W, and down is S. So now we've set some keys that we want to use. And we can actually write some code as well. The way we're going to do this, there's a function called keyboard check. You can also use like keyboard check press, keyboard check release. They check if you're on that frame clicking or releasing the button. We're going to use keyboard check. Keyboard check just checks if that key is being held down. And we're going to use a little bit of an interesting method, but this is going to help us a lot later when we do collisions. And that is we're going to set another variable called like horizontal movement. We can call it this. We'll set it to 0. And we're just going to set one for vertical movement. And this is a pretty good practice here. Because what we could do is we could check each key and then run some movement code for each key. But instead of doing that, we can essentially halve the amount of movement code we're running by checking the total horizontal movement we want to do and checking the vertical movement we want to do. And that's just going to stop any, like, you can get some bugs and stuff with collision if you do it, checking each key individually. But we don't want that. This is a better practice. So we're going to do horizontal movement. It's going to be equal to the left key. Or it's actually be the right key. Minus the left key. So if we fill this in. And what this means is the keyboard check function, it returns a Boolean value, which is a true or false value for if a key is being pressed. So where we have here keyboard check right key, it's just checking whether the right key is down. And we're not really caring about the Boolean. We're using this sort of as essentially with Boolean, a true is a 1 and a false is a 0. So it's better to think of it like that. So if this is true, if we're pressing the right key, then our horizontal movement is going to be 1 higher. And if we're pressing the left key, then our horizontal movement is going to be 1 lower. Which means if we're holding both the keys at the same time at 0, if we're holding neither key at 0, if we're holding the right key, it's going to be a 1. If we're holding the left key, it's going to be a -1, this value. And that's really useful because we can, you could imagine we just change the X value of the player based on this, or completely proportional to this. So we have horizontal movement. What we can do is we can do X and plus equals horizontal movement. And so, yeah, that's just going to move the player left or right. We also probably want to add a speed because we probably don't want to move at 1 pixel per frame, which is what this is going to be doing. So we can add a new variable. We'll call it mSpeed. And what we can do is we should actually go in the create function here. We're going to add a new event, the create function. If you guys don't know what plus equals is doing, I'll go through that as well. It's the exact same as x plus whatever you have here, right? If I get rid of this, I also just randomly put semicolons sometimes. You don't have to in GameMaker language. Can if you want. doesn't care. One of the beauties of GameMaker language is that it doesn't really care, and you can kind of mess around with the syntax a little bit, whatever you prefer. And yeah, these are exactly the same thing. So x plus equals something is the same as x equals whatever it is plus that on top. So if this is 1, then that means x equals whatever our x position is plus 1. So we're just going to move 1 to the right, essentially. And if it's -1, it's going to go 1 to the left. All right, awesome. We'll add this m speed back. And we're actually going to, in the create function, we're currently in the step function, we're declaring a few variables here that only really need to be declared once, right? We don't need to every single step say, this is what the left key is, this is what the right key is, what the up key is, what down key is. So we can move that to the create function. And what's important is that if you have var declaring a variable, if you have that, it makes it a local variable and it limits the scope, which means if I have var horizontal movement equals 0, I can only use horizontal movement inside this step function here, right? But since this is in the create function now, we actually want to remove these vars, which will make, it essentially makes these variables, or the scope of the variables, so that they're able to be accessed anywhere inside the object player. So now, in any function or wherever inside object player, I can always refer to the key left, key right, key up, key down. You can also make them global, like that, but we're not going to do that. There's not really any point of doing that right now. And global just means that you can access them anywhere, just anywhere in your program. If you have global variables, doesn't matter. If you have a different object, I can access the globals in there. But this is fine. We're just going to do this for now. And just going to make our code a little bit neater. Oh, we also need to declare our movement speed variable. We're going to do that in the create as well. We can just, I'm just giving it value 3, it's just a random value. Make it whatever you want, as long as it's not 0 or a negative number. All right, awesome. So we got horizontal movement equals this. And we also need to do the same for the vertical movement. So for the vertical movement, in GameMaker Studio, verticality is sort of the opposite as in a lot of other game development softwares, where increasing your Y value actually moves you down. So what am I doing here? That's 1 second. So a lot of, like, if you look at graphs, usually Y is up, right? So here's your graph. Usually this is like an increase in X value, and this is an increase in Y value. But GameMaker Studio sort of does the opposite. And the best way to think about it is GameMaker starts at the top left corner of the screen. This is the starting position. This is 0, 0. This is the origin. And then if you increase the Y, it goes down. And if you increase the X, it goes this way. So that's sort of how the coordinates are laid out in GameMaker. So we actually, if we're pressing the down key, then we want to increase the Y value. That's what I'm trying to say. So this will actually be, in the vertical movement, the down key. and we're going to subtract the up key. So that means that if we're holding just the up key, vertical movement's going to be -1, which means we're moving up because we're decreasing the Y value. And we're going to do the same. We can just press Control D to duplicate. Oh, that was not Control D. Control D to duplicate this line. You can also, if you're selecting a large amount of code and press Control D, it will duplicate all of that code. So Control D is super useful. But yeah, we're just going to Control D this one line, duplicate it. We'll just go Y plus equals the vertical movement times the movement speed. And I think that should be about it. We should be able to move our player now. Looks good to me. We'll just run the code and see if we can move our player around. So we got our player, and there it is. If I press WASD, you can see the player moves around. Beautiful. We're probably going to add collisions in the next episode. But yeah, this is great and all, but we can also do better in that we should add the rotation of the player, because it's kind of dumb if it's just facing up the whole time. So let's add the rotation. So I'm actually going to comment. If you use a // you can comment. And what a comment is, it just means code that's not going to run. So I'm going to leave a comment here that is saying movement code. There we go. That's a good comment. I'll leave a few gaps, and then we'll do rotation code. So down here, we're going to write our rotation code. The rotation's super easy in GameMaker. So what I'm actually going to do is I might rotate the sprite 90 degrees. So with our current sprite, he's facing upwards. But the way in GameMaker rotation works is like this, where this is 0 degrees. Imagine this is the origin. Straight to the right is 0 degrees, and it moves counterclockwise. Whereas straight up is going to be 90. To the left is going to be 180. And downwards is 270. So it rotates anti-clockwise. So I'll show you why in a moment, but we're just going to rotate if we go into edit image and we go image, rotate flames clockwise 90 degrees, it's probably going to turn out better if you align your sprites on the 0 degree axis. Because that's kind of, you'll see in a moment, because most of the functions, if I want to have my player pointing towards my mouse, the direction from my player to my mouse, if it's directly horizontal, will be 0. So if you don't have your characters aligned to the right like this, you're going to have to add like a bias. So you're just going to have to add a random 90 degrees or negative 90 degrees or positive 180 degrees. But it's easier just to align it to the right. Also, if we click on our player sprite here, you can set an origin for the player. You could do the middle center if you want. I'm going to choose a bit more towards the center of his body. This is where the player is going to rotate around. So the player's sprite will rotate around the origin. So if the origin's over in the top left corner, like in default, he's going to be rotating around the top left corner, which is going to look pretty silly. So we're not going to do that. We're going to put the origin somewhere on his body. And for the rotation, all we need is the direction towards the mouse, because our player is going to face towards our mouse. And lucky for us, there is a really easy way to do this. Let's set new variable angle. I'm going to call this angle to mouse. And that's going to equal, so what's the position? Is position angle? No. Point direction. Okay. I had a bit of a, got what it was called for a second there. Point direction is the function that we want. So there's two really useful Functions here, point direction and point distance are both really useful. They do pretty much what you would expect. Point direction just gets the direction between 2 points. Point distance gets the distance towards 2 points. We're going to use point direction. And essentially we've got our player, and then we're going to have our mouses somewhere. So point direction is going to give us this angle, which is really useful because all we have to do is rotate the player to be the same as this angle, and he'll be facing our mouse. So point direction just takes in a couple coordinates, x1, y1, x2, y2. This means the x and y from where we're pointing from, and then the x and y are from where we're pointing to. So we're pointing from our player, so that would be the x and the y. And we're pointing to the mouse. So to get the mouse x and y, you just write mouse underscore x, mouse underscore y. It's really that easy. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the image angle to the angle to mouse. It's good practice to separate out variables like this instead of straight away setting the image angle, because later on we might want to change what the image angle is. Maybe he's going to be like vibrating left and right when he's shooting, stuff like that. So it's best to always, it's better to have more variables than less variables, I would say. So doing it in this kind of method is quite good. Don't worry about the colon. All right, awesome. So if we run the code, we run the game, we should have rotation. Let's give it a crack. And there it is. So we got movement and we got rotation. Look at that, beautiful. Do some spinnies. And yeah, that's pretty much going to be today's lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to add collision, which is going to be a lot more interesting. We're going to add collision. We're going to add shooting. And then we're also going to add some enemies. That sort of stuff. Is there anything if there's anything in particular you guys want from the series, let me know. I'm going to really try to make it fleshed out and look fleshed out as well. Like, we're going to add effects and stuff later in the series. But for now, we're just keeping it simple. Movement, shooting, collisions. That's pretty much what it's going to look like in the next episode. So thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe if you want to get more tutorials. Please leave a comment if you want more tutorials. If you need any help, I will respond to comments pretty much straight away on the day that you drop them. So if something's not working, or you just have questions, or you want to add something specific, you need my help, just leave a comment. Super easy. All right, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.